This is a nuclear fuel pellet, and this is what is inside these casks. 5 of these pellets can power a single home for a year. The pellets are put together into long, thin rods that make up a fuel assembly. The assembly goes in and out of the reactor as a single unit. Sometimes mistakenly called spent nuclear fuel or high-level waste, used nuclear fuel from commercial nuclear power plants is not high-level waste, and is certainly not spent. Used fuel from a commercial nuclear power plant is only partially used. Just 5% of the energy in the fuel has been used. It can be recycled into new fuel, or easily stored until we can burn it in advanced reactors like the kind Bill Gates is building. The big question now is what radioactive materials are in these casks and why it's no big deal to stand next to one. Within these casks are almost 2,500 used fuel assemblies. That's a little less than half of all the fuel assemblies Columbia has used in its nearly 33-year history. Another 1,900 assemblies are stored in Columbia's spent fuel pool, and then there are 764 in the reactor core itself, producing electricity right now. In those 33 years, Columbia has produced 230 billion kilowatt hours of electricity from this fuel, all of it carbon-free. What you should know is that nuclear has the smallest waste stream of any energy source. That's because there's 1 million times more energy in a pound of uranium than in a pound of coal. Energy density. Which is why over 60 years of commercial nuclear power in America has only generated 70,000 tons of used nuclear fuel. That might sound like a lot, but our coal plants generate that much toxic waste every hour. Even solar generates more toxic waste than nuclear. In fact, all the used nuclear fuel in the United States from those 60 years of operations would fit on just one football field.
My name is Nick Turan. I'm a millennial who chose to become a nuclear engineer specifically to fight climate change. It's kind of a new breed of nuclear engineers.
A planetary geologist. I got into nuclear waste disposal because nuclear waste disposal is all about the rock. It's geology. Deep geologic disposal is all about the rock. If you pick the wrong rock, it's not very good. If you pick the right rock, it's great. So I've been working on that for a long time, along with other issues like acid mine drainage cleanup and things like that. So I'll end up talking about nuclear waste. It's actually a piece of cake. We know exactly what to do with it. It's not difficult. We're just not allowed to do it correctly for politics, and that's where a lot of this discussion is going to go. Politics intrudes itself into science a lot, and we end up not doing the right things that we should be doing because of that.
Thanks. All right. Well, Jim, I'm going to give you the first question, since you have the planetary view, which is, what are our planet's future energy needs?
We need about, right now, we produce 20 trillion kilowatt hours of electricity a year as a species. Okay, so 20 trillion kilowatt hours, great round number. The United States produces 4 trillion of that, so we produce 1/5 of the world's energy, and we only have a 5% of the world's people. So we produce a lot of energy. 20 trillion sounds like a lot, it is, but you need about 35 trillion in order to eradicate global poverty. So the only way to eradicate global poverty is to give everyone on Earth about 3,000 kilowatt hours per person per year. That's the only way to do it. Okay, you can talk about anything else you want, but it doesn't matter. You need to give everyone 3,000 kilowatt hours per person per year. Because a lot of the people in extreme poverty right now spend about 6 hours a day getting water. If you spend 6 hours a day getting water, and you have a little pump, a little electricity, you have a pipe, wow, it frees you up for amazing things. And with that, with increased energy comes decreased fertility. You know, the fertility rate drops to below 2 when you have about 3,000 kilowatt hours per person per year in your society. So the big question, all COP21 climate meeting in Paris was about, was how to give everyone 3,000 kilowatt hours per person per year without giving them coal. That was the only issue at COP21. You wouldn't know that if you listen to most of the news, but that's what we need to do, and how do you do that?
So Jim, you're a nuclear waste expert. What is nuclear waste and what's the problem with it? What can we do?
So there's four categories of nuclear waste. Okay, there's spent nuclear fuel from a commercial reactor. That's the easiest one to deal with because it's solid, it doesn't leak, there's no liquid. I know when everyone's watching The Simpsons, the green goo that comes out, that's weapons waste. Okay, that's weapons waste. So, which is high-level waste. So high-level waste is only weapons waste. People get that confused. High-level waste is only weapons waste, and it's just hot weapons waste. It's kind of the peanut butter stuff in the tanks at Hanford. I mean, it's kind of nasty. It's got salt cake. It's gooey. It's gross. Then there's transuranic waste, which is another type of bomb waste. About a fifth of the tanks at Hanford are filled with transuranic waste. It's not as hot, but some of it can be hot, some of it not hot. It's simply plutonium, uranium waste from making weapons. Okay, it doesn't have a lot of gamma emitters in it. That's the only thing. And then there's low-level waste, which is dirt, contaminated clothing and stuff like that. I mean, it's very, very low level. The top three require deep geologic disposal. Okay, by law, you have to put them in a deep geologic disposal, about a half mile or more below the earth. And again, you pick the right rock, and it's great. So a weapons reactor is completely different than an energy reactor. Okay, weapons reactors simply make weapons. They do not make electricity. Okay, so North Korea couldn't make electricity from its weapons reactor even if it wanted to. The 9 reactors at Hanford in the 40s, 50s, and 60s were only to make plutonium for bombs, period. So when you run those quickly, you only run them for 6 months because you don't want to ingrow any poisons. And so you quickly take them out, dissolve them up in acid, and run them through a series of batch tests to remove the plutonium. And that's what all this is. When you dissolve them and take out all of the fission products or the non-plutonium, non-uranium constituents, they go into the high-level single-shell tanks at Hanford. Okay, 177 of them. Okay, the next steps, the fourth and fifth steps, are polishing. You're pretty much polishing the plutonium and uranium so you can use them in bombs, because bombs have to be all uranium-235 or all plutonium-239. You can't have anything else in them, so you're basically polishing that. That goes into the other tanks there, and most of those are leaking, okay, at Hanford, which is why we actually got to get the nuclear waste issue under control, because we know what to do with it. We're simply not allowed to do it correctly. So that's the Hanford tanks. It has nothing to do with energy, everything to do with bombs, and they've been sitting there for decades. We know what to do with them. It's a piece of cake. We're just not doing it. Good.
We've looked at where used nuclear fuel comes from and what it's made of. Now let's talk safety. Yes, used nuclear fuel is different than, say, a burnt pile of coal. But used nuclear fuel is actually easy to handle and easy to store. Some people confuse commercial used nuclear fuel with the 56 million gallons of radioactive nuclear weapons sludge at the Hanford site and the environmental cleanup that's going on there. America has never had a problem with nuclear fuel, new or used. We've never had any release of radioactivity while transporting nuclear fuel over millions of miles on the road. No one has ever died handling commercial nuclear fuel, unlike chemical waste or biological waste. I've handled all three, and I'll take nuclear waste hands down. The reason I say this is that commercial nuclear waste is solid. It can't leak the way liquid waste does. It's really heavy, so no one can run up and steal it. It can't be used to make weapons, not even a dirty one. And the radiation coming from it is really easy to measure and to shield. It's 1,000,000 times easier to measure radiation than it is to measure, say, lead or mercury or dioxin. We can see one atom disintegrating, but you need billions of atoms of mercury to see it at all. This is a double-edged sword because we always see radiation, even in nature, and this tends to freak people out. But it takes a lot of radiation to hurt someone, which almost never happens. This is why nuclear power is the safest form of energy we have in America. So do we need a long-term or interim repository for used nuclear fuel? Absolutely. But with climate change and concerns about CO2 emissions, we shouldn't throw away what is our best tool to fight it in the electricity sector, nuclear energy. Listen, we know how to handle used nuclear fuel safely. We know how to store it for hundreds or even thousands of years if we need to. What we need is the political will to follow the science we already know. Slide 7.
Slide 7.
these are the numbers. This is the mortality rate per trillion kilowatt hours produced by each of these sources. This is totally normalized. Now, China is reeling from this. In 1992, they started building 600 coal-fired power plants simply to lift 500 million people up out of abject poverty. Now, they still have 800 million in abject poverty, so they're still going to build more coal, more gas, and they're planning 400 new nuclear plants by 2050, because they know this. This isn't any secret. So again, the global average death print for coal is about 100,000 per trillion kilowatt hours produced. Now, in the United States, we only kill about 10,000 a year with coal. It's not bad. It's supposed to get a laugh. So we only kill about 10,000. That's okay. Oil, again, the fossil fuels kill more people, even biomass. The World Health Organization just classified biomass as a health epidemic in the world because the lungs just don't like to breathe in burnt carbon. That's just the way it is. It's like, that's why smoking is bad. So think of coal as secondhand smoke. That's what it's like. And then you get down to the non-fossil fuels. You get solar, wind, hydro, nuclear. They're much less, and those are all accidents. All accidents. So if you look at wind, I mean that's not bad, and 150 that's much better than the others. But notice that I have global, then U.S. for coal, hydro, and nuclear. Why is the U.S. number so much lower? Why do we kill so fewer people? Shout it out, come on. Regulation. So the reason coal is better is because of the Clean Air Act. The Clean Air Act dropped our death print from coal from about 100,000 to 10. That's not bad. Hydro, why is hydro so much better? FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, they actually inspect dams, and they shut them down when they find a crack, like they did at Priest Rapids Dam a couple years ago. Okay? Other countries actually don't do that. And then nuclear, why is nuclear so low? NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, again, they will shut down any nuclear reactor that they don't think is running safely, period. And they'll shut it down and no one can say anything about it, which is kind of funny. But again, the other places, no. I mean, we had been telling Fukushima, TEPCO, for 10 years before Fukushima that their seawall was crap, their backup generation was inadequate, and they hadn't even drilled. So, and they invented the word tsunami, so it's kind of disappointing. Yes, actually, more radioactive emissions occur from coal than any other source, because there's a lot of uranium and thorium and radon in coal.
How do people die from solar? This is not
falling off. I actually have a solar panel on my roof. There's a part of my roof that is so dangerous I will not go up there. And these guys were running around, not even roped up. It's a 40-foot drop. And occasionally they fall off, break their necks. That's what it is. But yeah, no, and wind too, the same thing. It's maintenance on wind turbines, and if you don't rope up, you can die. I don't know why we don't rope up everyone that's above 10 feet. I mean, that's insane, but we do.
All right.
This is the life cycle cost of each source, unsubsidized. So again, gas, that's why we're building gas. Gas is cheap. The gas itself is cheap. It's easy to throw up a gas plant. Doesn't require much cement. Doesn't require much steel. You can just throw it up in a year. The regulators love it, and of course it's better than coal, but it's still a fossil fuel. So that's why gas is is being built so often. Now nuclear isn't expensive. Wind's a little bit more expensive. Solar's a little bit more expensive. But if you use the production tax credits for renewables and the construction tax credits for renewables, that 11 cents goes down to 7, and that 13 cents goes down to 10. And so suddenly they are cheaper. They're not really cheaper. You're just switching the cost from the ratepayer to the taxpayer. And since we don't know what our taxes go to anyway, no one cares or even notices. But at the end of the month, in your bill, it looks like it's cheap. Okay, is that good? I love socialized electricity. I love socialized medicine. That's great. But again, back up one slide. These are not all that different, except gas is cheap, but they're not really that back up, yeah. It turns out energy is the cheapest it's ever been in the history of humanity. Right now, it's the cheapest it has ever been, and because of that, food is cheaper than it's ever been. Okay, now you can see that little peak there. Point to it. Yeah, that little peak, which was the 1973 oil embargo. Kind of bizarre, which was totally fabricated, but that's okay. So anyway, so it's cheaper than it's ever been. And so if you're going to make huge changes now in our electrical sources, now's the time to do it because energy is so cheap. Okay. So I usually ask this question first. What's the fastest growing energy source in the world? What is it? It's coal. Okay, this year was the first time coal has not gone up significantly, the first time. And so when you're talking about climate change, you basically have the bottom several, right, from hydro down. That's what you have to fight global warming. That's all you have. If you start spending, wind and solar to replace nuclear, then you're not going to replace coal, which is the issue, and gas. And I don't even have oil on here. Oil is between coal and gas, but it's all transportation. So if you don't actually engage all of the non-fossil fuel sources, you have no chance of replacing these. It doesn't matter. Sorry, you have no chance at all. And the build rates, even if you use all the steel in the world produced every year to build wind turbines, you cannot build enough to replace everything else. So you have to choose. You have to say, we're going to get rid of fossil fuel or not. I mean, if you don't want to get rid of fossil fuel, okay. But if you want to do that, you better do it with everything you have that's not fossil fuel, period. You can't not have hydro, you can't not have nuclear, because I know it's, wind is screaming up there, I know that, but it's not going to overtake coal quickly enough without the help of hydro, nuclear, and wind, and solar. So that's pretty much it. Oh, the one before that. There is an urgency here. People talk about urgency, talk about tipping points. This is it. This is, we do everything we possibly can to replace fossil fuel, and in 2011 we would have had to start decreasing our global emissions by almost 4% a year. Okay, well, we blew that one. 2015, we started, it's like, if we're gonna wait now to 2015, we're gonna have to start decreasing it by 5% a year. And we blew that one. So 2020 is coming up, and we're gonna have to start decreasing our emissions by 9% a year. Okay, we're not doing this, and you're not gonna do this by getting rid of hydro and nuclear, which is your main foil to fossil fuel right now. So again, you just need everything. You need all of the above, meaning all of the non-fossil fuel. That's what you need to do this. If you don't do it, you're not gonna meet any climate goals at all. Okay, and if you don't care about that, that's fine. We've got lots of fossil fuel. We have lots and lots of fossil fuel. I don't know if, I'm a geologist. What's happened in the last 2 years with fracking is just amazing. We have drill rigs now that can walk from site to site. Did you know that? We have walking drill rigs, which is bizarre. And we've discovered more gas, more oil. The fracking is just gone like crazy. We have more oil, gas, and coal in this country than everyone else in the world. You don't realize we have so much fossil fuel. And it's hard to have humans not use what they have a lot of. Mm-hmm. This is really tricky. So it really takes a political will, a real will, to stop using fossil fuel, but you better use all of the non-fossil fuels, or this is just, it's okay. I mean, this is reality. This is why Jim Hansen, the guru of climate change, says you need nuclear. You do. If you don't use it, you don't use hydro, that's it. We're stuck, because we have so much fossil fuel.
Perfect. Thank you.
So going back all the way to the 1950s, there was some seminal studies, one by the National Academy of Science in the US, that's looked at various options for dealing with this radioactive waste. Shooting it into space, deep sea burial, burial in glaciers, and burial in various kinds of geologic settings.
The current plan? Bury it in Yucca Mountain, a radioactive waste depository currently being constructed in Nevada. And, at the rate we're going, will be filled before it even opens. A problem that one little government lab has been working on since nuclear science was invented. But this is today's Argonne National Laboratory.
My name is Monica Verdovito, and today with my team from Argonne, we're doing the impossible. We are recycling nuclear waste.
Monica and her team of scientists are developing nuclear waste recycling technology. If successful, it could reduce the radioactive waste generated by nuclear power plants by 90%.
What goes into a nuclear power plant is a fuel rod that has uranium oxide inside of a stainless steel tube. That goes into a reactor. The uranium actually fissions or breaks apart, produces energy, heat, which actually drives a turbine and makes electricity.
But once only 5% of the uranium has reacted, the entire fuel rod becomes too contaminated with other elements generated in the process and must be disposed of.
It becomes what we term spent nuclear fuel. It's no longer efficient at making electricity, so it's then treated as waste.
This very valuable uranium oxide is now contaminated with plutonium, americium, curium, and the fission products,
Pretty much the rest of the periodic table.
leaving a dangerous radioactive cocktail. Monica and her team are working to extract the usable elements for energy production.
So we have extraction, we have the scrub, we have a strip, and we have a wash. The goal of these technologies is to efficiently close the nuclear fuel cycle.
Simple, in theory.
The processes are what we call solvent extraction processes. For example, Italian dressing, where you have oil and water mixed together, you shake them, for example, and then the phases will separate.
Instead of oil and water, this process uses spent fuel rods and acid. Behind this completely airtight, lead-shielded glass is a very complex set of chemical experiments using specially designed machines called mixer settlers. These devices are designed with multiple stages of mixing and separating to extract the elements from the radioactive soup. The process is then sped up with a device Argonne invented called the centrifugal contactor.
So we can do the mixing and the separation of the two phases in 1 to 3 seconds. We're very proud that in the last 6 years, we have developed what we call advanced recycling technologies.
Except that here, you have to use robots and glove boxes to do it. This is a dangerous recycle.
Solving nuclear waste problems is not something easy or trivial or something that you have people volunteer to do.
But it's of tantamount importance, which is why Monica and her team do volunteer to do it.
There are a couple of reasons for fast reactors. One is better safety. Another one is resource extension, where we can use basically 100% of the energy in the uranium ore instead of just 1%. And another one is waste reduction. So I think we could all agree that if we can get our spent nuclear fuel into a state that is no more radiotoxic than that uranium ore, then we have satisfied our obligation to society to protect them from health effects. So we propose that we build a fleet of fast reactors and we fuel them with spent fuel from our current light water reactor fleet. And we fission all that stuff, and this is what we're left with. How do we do this? And the system that we devised to do this is called the Integral Fast Reactor. It has actually a similarity to the molten salt reactor in that it's on-site recycling. Ours is a dirty fuel, clean waste system in that what comes out at the end is fission products plus maybe some trace amounts of the heavy stuff. So the bad stuff all goes back in the reactor, including some of the fission products, which make this material self-protecting. This is a mock-up of the recycling plant we built at Argonne West, and spent fuel comes in and fresh fuel goes out, and it's attached to the reactor. So I think the big difference today about public perception of nuclear is before nuclear was another way to generate electricity, and it had all these supposed downsides, which were factually true, but in terms of real impact were just sort of made up. Now there is a definitive reason to pursue nuclear energy, and that's climate change.
Energy Northwest began filling these casks in 2002. There are now 36 casks filled with used nuclear fuel in this storage facility. So how did it get here? After spending 6 years in the reactor creating 70 million kilowatt hours of carbon-free electricity from just one assembly, the used fuel assembly is placed in a spent fuel pool to cool for about 5 years. Then those assemblies are placed into dry casks, robust steel and concrete containers that each weigh about 180 tons, fully loaded. This facility is here because these assemblies are radioactive. High doses of radioactivity can hurt you, can kill you, of course. But low doses have little or no effect, like dental x-rays or CT scans. So I'm safe standing right next to this cask. The average American gets about 620 millirem of radiation a year from natural and man-made sources. We call this background, such as the sun and those dental x-rays. After only 5 years in the spent fuel pool, most all of the hot stuff is decayed away completely. Only 2 elements are left that are highly radioactive. With 30-year half-lives, these 2 are hot for about 270 years. Then they're gone too. What's left after that are the very long-lived elements like uranium and plutonium, with half-lives of thousands of years or more. But they're not very radioactive. In fact, you can hold them in your hand. But they should be either burned up in new reactors or disposed of in a deep geologic repository forever. What's important to know about radiation is, the hotter it is, the shorter the time it exists. Elements that aren't very radioactive last a longer time. Fortunately, dry cask storage is cheap, easy, and safe for over 100 years as the fuel cools off, and it doesn't take up much space at all. So why do some people get so upset about used nuclear fuel?